Will you pray with me? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Not only is the church packed in a way it is not for any other Sunday, it is also full of new faces, or faces we haven't seen in a while. And that is a wonderful thing. I have a friend who attends a church up the road, and she told me once that the pastor spent Christmas Eve berating the folks he didn't see the rest of the year. I don't get that. Yes, it would be wonderful to have a full house every Sunday, but it is well worth celebrating that we have one today. It is just great to have you all here. And I must confess, it's a little stressful. For it's not the number of people that makes Easter Sunday such a high-stakes day for a preacher. It's that there are so many folks who come only on today. And no matter how long they've been away, most likely they have come because they are looking for a reason to come back. Easter brings out the hope in us. It inspires us with a longing for a different ending than the one we think we know. For it is on Easter that we stare into the darkness of the world and dare to proclaim that Christ is risen. And because of that, the world will never be the same. We face into the fears and despair and dare to hope that a different day is dawning. For it is on Easter that we tell the story of why we are Christian. We say that the resurrection is real and that it matters and that it's worth showing up for. And yet we also know that being a Christian, all hopefulness aside, really makes no sense. Let's be honest, even those of us who are here each and every Sunday, we know this. In our hyper-realistic, fact-checked, data-driven world, faith has a tough time. Belief, as it is commonly defined, is seen as suspect, naive, beneath our intelligence. And I get that. How often do we see religious beliefs used as arguments against progress, against human rights, or care of our planet? Too often. How often do we see our scriptures being used as weapons against those who live differently or love differently, those whose lives do not conform to a strict reading of the Bible? Way too often. And so, as critically thinking, morally sensitive people, we resign ourselves that we must choose between our faith and our intellect or our conscience. If that's what it means to be Christian, we say, count me out, and we stay out, at least for a time. Many of us first stumbled through these doors looking for a refuge from just that kind of rigid doctrine and bullying belief. We had hope that there was more to Jesus, to following Jesus, than that. And we found it. For here, belief is not an intellectual assent to a set of religious principles given to us by someone else. It is not a denial of the complicated messiness of the world, nor does it seek to contain the mystery of God in a cramped, dogmatic box. So that is what belief is not. But what is it then? Perhaps for us, belief is not about denying the realities of the world, but seeing them through a different set of lenses. A couple of years ago, I had an epiphany about the meaning of the word belief. For those of you who have been with us for a while, you know that we like to play with words around here. We love new variations as much as we love unearthing original meanings. At times, we can get downright geeky about it. So you can only imagine my thrill when I came upon a book by biblical scholar Marcus Borg called Speaking Christian. In it, he unpacks a variety of Christian words and phrases that have gotten buried under centuries of distorting cultural baggage and interpretation. Belief is one of them. He explains that the word, often translated as belief in the Bible, is really much closer to the Old English word beloaf, which means beloved. In Old English and in the Bible, the word always had a person as an object, not a statement. You do not believe things about God as in with your mind. Our brains can only take us so far. Instead, you beloved God, as in with your heart. It has nothing to do with doctrine or catechism or even historical proof. This kind of belief that we claim here is so much bigger than that. Yet on Easter Sunday, we must admit that if there was ever a belief that challenges us both intellectually and spiritually, it is belief in the resurrection. As folks who take the Bible seriously but not literally, who have a healthy respect for biology and physics and the finality of death, the doctrine of resurrection makes no sense. But as folks who also know that there is more to this life than what we can comprehend with our minds, that there are spiritual realities that are larger than our data or our science, belief in the resurrection is why we are here. We aren't looking to understand it intellectually, but to prove it scientifically. We are not to prove it scientifically, but to live into it with our hearts and our souls. We don't want information about it. We want transformation through it. We are seeking to beloved the resurrection. In our gospel story this morning, Mary Magdalene experiences that kind of resurrection transformation. Hers is a story of despair turned to hope, of fear turned to love. And like most good love stories, it begins in the dark. This story comes to us from the Gospel of John, and we know that John loves to play with metaphors, and darkness is one of his favorite ones. It was in darkness that John tells us the world was dwelling before the light of Christ, the one John calls the Word, burst through at the dawn of creation. Among the first words he writes at the beginning of his gospel are these: "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it." And so it is only fitting that we find ourselves on the edge of darkness at the end of his gospel story. For it is just before dawn when Mary finds herself back in Jesus' tomb. She is confused, she is frightened and alone. The world makes no sense to her, or maybe it makes all too much sense. Once she loved, the one she loved, the one she believed in, the one who held the promise of hope for the world has died. He spoke of love and justice and peace. He lived a life of compassion and mercy, and he proclaimed that a new day was dawning. And the powers who rule through fear killed him for it. Unable to accept the hope he offered, they silenced him instead. By the world's metrics of power, it makes perfect sense. It's a reality we know all too well. Those of us who are gathered here in the dark this past Friday night came face to face with that reality. We faced into our fears, into our despair, into our complicity with the ways of the world that lead to grief. We have seen it too often, the way that the systems of domination seek to shut down the radical call of love, extinguish the flame of hope, just as they had done to Jesus that awful Friday night. And Mary's loss is profound. That kind of loss is not hypothetical. It is all too real to many of us, and it is often personal. Many of us live our lives in the dark, where hope feels like a fragile thing. Perhaps that is you. For earlier this week, during this time we call Holy Week, a relationship broke apart. Earlier this week, someone else learned that their son isn't coming home from war. Just this week, someone got a phone call confirming that the diagnosis is terminal. Just a few days ago, a job was lost and a house was foreclosed on, and a mother is wondering how to tell her kids. Earlier this week, someone's hope was crucified, and the darkness is overwhelming. And yet it is into this darkness that we believe a light will dawn. In fact, at the heart of our faith is this one enduring truth. It is only through the experience of grief, through facing the reality of death, that we can ever hope to experience life. This is not something we know intellectually, but something that we feel viscerally. A pastor I know describes it this way: no one is ever ready to encounter Easter until he or she has spent time in the dark, a place where hope cannot be seen. Easter is the last thing we are expecting, and that is why it terrifies us. This day, as bright as it is not about bunnies or springtime or Easter egg hunts. It is about more hope than we can handle. It was more hope than Mary could handle, which was most likely why she could not recognize Jesus even when he was right in front of her. She thought she knew the end of the story, and all she can do is mourn the loss of her friend. When the man she assumes is the gardener asks her why she weeps, she simply says that she wants his dead body back. If things can't be the way they were before, if she can't turn back the clock, at least she wants to hold on to whatever she can have of Jesus. She is resigned to death. The world has won. Yet it is then that Jesus calls her by name and her eyes are opened. "Rabboni," she cries, and throws her arms around him. Yet Jesus gently tells her that she cannot hold on to him. He is here, but he is different. She cannot cling to what has been. Jesus of Nazareth has become the risen Christ. There is a new reality breaking through, new life, new hope, and it is beyond anything she could have imagined. For those of us who crave certainty more than hope, and I think that's just about all of us, this can be unsettling news. So unsettling that we may prefer to stay in the darkness rather than risk all this light. We might decide that the darkness is all there is, that the world in all its pain and disappointment is as good as it gets. But then again, we might dare to believe that there is more to our lives than shadows. We might dare to believe that our broken world is not as God intends it to be. We might even be brave enough to move our faith from our heads to our hearts. The last words Jesus left with his friends the night before he died were these: "Love one another as I have loved you." In them, he offers a new way of living, a transformation of our hearts and minds that changes the way we see and engage the world. The resurrection takes our blinders off. It reveals the lie that the world tells us, the story that hate and violence and greed are stronger than love, and that death has the last word. That is a lie, because the last word always belongs to God. Where the crucifixion of Jesus is the world's no to his radical and extravagant love, the resurrection is God's yes. Yes to justice, yes to mercy, yes to compassion, yes to peace. The resurrection is the ultimate sign that hope is stronger than fear, and it turns the world upside down. Every expectation we create, every belief about Jesus we carve into stone or close up into our Bibles is just another attempt to put him back in the tomb. But he won't stay there, and neither should we. When we stop clinging to an old vision of who Jesus is, one that may have kept our faith small and cramped or non-existent, we may even let go long enough to feel the truth of the resurrection, even if we can't understand it. The question Easter asks of us is not, do we believe in the doctrine of the resurrection? That's not particularly hard. We can will ourselves to believe just about anything. No, what the Gospels are asking us is not do we believe, but do we beloved? Will we allow the risen Christ, God's resounding yes, to change our hearts and transform our lives? After that Easter encounter in the garden, Mary was never the same, and neither are we. For nothing stays the same after we have encountered Jesus outside the tomb, after we have realized that there is a different ending to our story than the one we had imagined. Nothing is ever the same when we are offered more hope than we can handle. And that hope is what brings us here this morning. That hope is what matters. That hope is what makes the resurrection real. So let's not just believe it. Let's beloved it. Let it grow within us each time we celebrate the resurrection on this Easter day and every day. Let us live into it with our body, our soul, and our mind, so that our lives will never be the same. For Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Amen, and thanks be to God.